So how much have you guys been following the news as far as the refugee policy recently?
I mean, I've been following it, but whenever I think I'm following it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something else,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a lot of things happening all at the same time. And, um, it's one thing to issue a policy, but then watching the effects of the policies kind of filter out. Um, it's not refugee policy, but my wife works in like the grants world
Mm.
and federal funding world. And, watching her have to adapt to like the cuts to federal funding, or the pauses or the freezes or whatever, um, is like every day there's something else, right? So I think it kind of mirrors the situation with immigration.
So IRC has put out on their website, and IRC is a refugee resettlement agency, says shortly after taking office, the Trump administration announced the suspension of refugee resettlement, a program that offers safety to some of the most vulnerable refugees in the world and has saved countless lives. This executive order is a step backwards for America. The IRC urges the Trump administration to reverse course, maintain the resettlement program, and work with its partners around the world to maintain global resettlement slots. So that's what IRC is saying. So IRC is saying that President Trump has suspended refugee resettlement money. And I have friends at World Relief who are, reacting to this in much the same way as well. How are you guys feeling about this?
You go first.
I think there is an element of uncertainty. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's gonna come. And just looking at the trajectory of Trump, I think he's in for some major changes. He's of course anti-establishment. That's what we know. And challenging establishment is gonna stir some trouble for sure. How big of a trouble it is, that the only time will tell.
I mean, I'm a little conflicted, but I was trying to explain this to my children. If you're a country, I mean, people are looking at it like it's a ban. It's not a ban, it's a pause, right? Like all across the board. And I read some of the orders on the White House website, and they were talking about, the length of time being like 90, giving the department heads of lots of agencies 90 days to give a full summary of action. The focus on immigration has been a Trump administration focus since the first administration, right? Um, what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of it is a continuation or an amplification of the Obama policies. So, Obama did 3 million deportations. Um, you know, it's kind of like, well, Obama has deported his 3 million, but I'm going to deport my thing,
Yeah.
my tens of millions. Um, so, you know, I kind of like, I have a huge heart for refugees. Obviously, we work with them all the time. I think, like, as far as a country, if you can't stop something for 90 days, whether it be aid or like a, influx of refugees or something like that, like you're not in a good place as a country. Like if you can't just say, "Hey, we're going to like look at ourselves for a minute and see what's going on inside because we're aware of like, disconnects in our security process or how we're spending the money or where other people are, right?
Mm.
Like, and I heard like another like political perspective. This happens in every administration. Every administration does this. They come in and they say, "Well, you have, X amount of days, department heads, to give me a full summary of what's going on in your departments and recommendations as to how we should proceed." So it's different when a president wins a second term, right? So if Trump had won a second term against Biden, right, you would have seen a lot of these things happening. The difference is that he lost. So now there's a 4-year gap, and there's 4 years for those people to think about how they're going to implement the plan.
Mm.
So with certain things, right, like you don't have to come in and, they ran on the border, right? That their election policy, a lot of things that they were saying policy wise were like about floods of migrants taking over the border. The conflict for me is like leaving Afghans who served in the U.S. military's families in Afghanistan, stuff like that.
Those are actually excluded from the suspension.
Oh, really?
Afghan SIVs are excluded from the suspension.
Oh, that's fantastic. See, because this is how quickly things change, right? Yesterday, my wife sent me an article saying, I don't know how you feel about this. And I read through the article and we were talking about it like, you know, as we read it, like, I can't remember if it was last night or yesterday morning, but saying that that's what happened. That, now millions and like tens of thousands of Afghans were going to be stuck in different countries.
Yeah, so Afghans waiting for some sort of refugee program that are not SIVs, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But for SIVs with the military, then that's not true.
See, I think that's great. Like, to me, that looks at like a what you would kind of look as a chaotic situation. Like, no, we're not taking anyone. To saying that there's at least some thought going into it.
Yeah, the rationality is good, and I think one aspect is to see, of course, myself as an immigrant, right?
I mean, all three of us are immigrants.
Right.
Yeah.
You against your own will, but
Well,
well, I mean, you were a baby. You weren't resisting, but
Right.
they threw me over the fence and I climbed back over, and then they threw me back over again.
So,
I love turkey.
yeah. I think that the situation at the border should be controlled. It wasn't the way it is with Biden administration, and I think Trump. I recognize and acknowledge Trump's stance on closing the borders and just letting people come through due diligence and proper ways, rather than just jumping the fence over and saying we need refugee or whatever status is, right? So that is good, but at the end of the day, how we see here, people are settled for so long. They have their connections, homes, families, blah blah blah, right? And also, if you take away all those things in just one go, then it leaves people shattered, I think.
I mean, I agree with that. The flip side of that, I mean, and again, I'm not like, I don't like seeing people pulled out of their homes, I watched this morning on Twitter, people were posting like ICE raids in Miami, going to people's houses and, taking people away, right? Like, and what's happening is they're going to go look for criminals, and then they're finding other people who don't belong, in the kind of network of that. So they're taking criminals out, but they're also taking like, hey, you don't belong here, and you don't belong here, and you don't belong here, and they're detaining them and getting them ready for deportation. But I mean, this goes all the way back to Clinton, like the Clinton presidencies, where people were like, we need immigration reform, and everyone has tried to like, I mean, Bush tried to like put a bill out there. Um, Obama tried to put a bill out there. The Trump administration tried to put a bill out there, and nobody has voted on a bill since the mid 90s, right? Like, the immigration reform is really trying to reform a policy that's been in place since the late 80s. And that's a long time. So when you're looking at like what's happening, I think what happens when you kick the can down the road for, coming up on 30 years, maybe longer, like, oh, sorry, almost 40 years, um, you're going to have ugly when it comes time to like reckon with it. You know what I mean? And I think the ugly, like, 10,000 people jumping the border fence a day, uh, for the past 4 years, and now 10,000 people a week being rounded up, is ugly. It's ugly, but it's also like the lack of like commitment.
Yes.
People didn't commit to actually like doing a pathway to citizenship, like clearly defining what visas were and how long people could stay them and all that other stuff.
Yes. So how I feel about this is a lot of people are very upset about this. And a lot of Christians we know are upset about what's happening with the border and with deportations and stuff like this. And I think part of this is a consequence of a lot of people who are pro-immigration. I consider myself pro-immigration. I'm an immigrant. Not living in the real world.
Start foreigners are ruining this country.
I mean, like, America is established on the basis of immigration.
Yeah, yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
is immigrant at some
Yeah,
point.
like
So
most of my friend, I'm an immigrant. Most of my friends are immigrants, but the three of us have been working with refugees and asylum seekers for the last 2 years, and the situation is absolute chaos,
mhm.
and so much is just creating this sort of permanent underclass of people in our cities that are not receiving community support. You have a government that believes in having people here, and you have refugee resettlement agencies that believe in having people here, but these people end up being disconnected from the general population,
Mhm.
meaning people are not integrating and they're forming their own little ghettos, and people are broke and
Okay,
disconnected
can I
and miserable.
say something about that? When I used to work at Princeton University, and there were rules on campus as like who could work on campus and who could work off campus. On campus was considered where all the academic buildings were. Off campus was housing areas and some of that other stuff. And I was a painter and we were painting an apartment. It was February in New Jersey, and somebody hired a sub, not union, but and I mean I don't love unions, but um, they hired these migrants to come in and dig around these pipes in February in New Jersey. That rock is it's like a glacier, right? It's totally frozen. It's been frozen for months, and these guys are out there with no gloves, right? We took our gloves, and gave them to them, right? Because I can just call down, my shop and be like, hey, I need more painter's gloves. Like, bring them. So we were giving them to those guys because they were out there, in like 11-degree weather, like digging around these pipes. Um, this is a university with a several $billion endowment. I mean, they have a ton of money, but right down the street, like probably about, 3/4 of a mile away from it, is a little ghetto. And that's where all of the undocumented people lived, right? Whether they were from Haiti or Latin America or whatever. Um, and it was just really bothered me because it was like, here's these people who are intellectual, right? Say they care and are wealthy, right? And I don't begrudge any of those things to those people. Like if that's your lot in life, then that's your lot in life, whatever. But then to look at these other people and say, well, we want you here, but there's no like you can dig around the pipes for less than what everyone else is making in the middle of February. And by the way, you'll be working for a guy who doesn't care whether or not you have the right equipment to do it, right? And then amplify that into like people caring for people's houses, babysitters and cooks and chefs and janitors and all this other stuff. And it really just it left a bad taste in my mouth as an immigrant, right? Like, you're content with keeping those people as an underclass,
Yes.
right?
So how I feel about this is that the pro-immigration crowd has not thought enough about security, proper assimilation, and the long-term value in this, and is way over relied on the government and government funding in order to provide these things. And the government is ill-equipped to actually welcome people into the country.
Right.
It just can't do that. You need a general move of the population to be able to welcome and integrate people into the country. How I think about this is I kind of think of Donald Trump like Godzilla. I personally, I was generally happy when he won the election. Um, in the same way, the main characters in Godzilla, the MonsterVerse, not the Godzilla minus one,
Minus one.
not minus one.
Those are two very different outcomes.
Yeah. um,
What you talking about?
so
we'll discuss off.
yeah, so King Ghidorah is this evil three-headed dragon which wants to rule and dominate the world, and that's kind of how I see the sort of like, left-wing revolutionary like ideology that kind of like creeps into anything, essentially wants to supplant God with the state. That is it frightens me in several ways, and Donald Trump is like Godzilla that's there to take that kind of thing down. Now, the characters in Godzilla are happy when Godzilla shows up, but still have to do a ton of groundwork to make sure the innocent people who should not be crushed by the giant lizard fight are not crushed by the giant lizard fight.
Right.
And that's how I essentially see the way I feel like I have to act in a Donald Trump presidency. Hey, glad you're here. Please don't crush my friends and family.
Listen, I remember 4 years ago when, we were starting to come into the initial wave of refugees from Afghanistan, right? So, but particularly when I started working here at Almeida, um, I was wondering, there was a thought in the back of my head, particularly with one guy we were talking to who told us that he, pretty much hiked through rainforests, made it to Brazil and pretty much walked all the way and, bribed people to like smuggle him and everything else like that up to the border, and then was finally able to surrender himself. And I just thought, it's not going to last forever. And I retain that thought with all of the immigrants we're talking to. Like, you want good outcomes for people, right?
Yes.
But just based on my experience, that it's going to change, right? Like it was a change from the previous 4 years.
And also, I think it's easy for people who are working directly with refugees and immigrants to think, okay, if we didn't have these kind of systems in place, then we wouldn't have these people we know and love living with us today, which is true. But the thing is, if we think of like Caesar and Anna, an Afghan refugee dating a Ukrainian refugee, without the invasions of Ukraine and the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, that thing wouldn't be happening.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm happy. That doesn't mean those things were good.
Yeah.
Even though God uses all things for good. Okay.
Yeah. One last thing that I would like to add in, just take less than a half a minute. I agree with most of Trump's policies, with some reservations, but one thing that shouldn't be there is invoking the birthright citizenship. That is something that I openly say it should not be there. Of course, when you're controlling refugees and you don't want people to come, then of course they will not come. But like people who have kids born here, if you say that they're not U.S. citizen, that is unjust. And we advocated it for whole world. It should be there, just the way it is here. And invoking that is not a great gesture. That's what my final take is.